not just global. It was a class on it was called Society, Power, and Change. It was like about we studied many different topics in sociology and globalization was one of them.
Okay, no, I studied with Wallerstein myself, and so I was interested. You said this is about Wallerstein?
Not about Wallerstein, but we studied his concepts of like how we understand different countries interacting with different levels and how that kind of generated the idea of globalization.
Okay, who taught the course?
It was Professor Julian Go. Professor Julian Go.
Oh, Julian Go, yeah, sure. Okay, no, that's interesting. Okay, the simple point I'm making is not many people are putting these together. And I think ideally you should get hey, I never heard that before, at least once a week, maybe once every class, maybe more than that. and so that is, but then second, more important, do these make sense? Do these provide a better interpretation, as I'm suggesting may be the case, happened with Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan. That a lot of smart even social scientists at this university are wrong. You'll hear me say. Okay, but if I'm going to say that, I've got to have pretty good ways of formulating a testable proposition, testing it carefully, and then showing that before I say people are wrong. Clearly, you're, as you see me at least trying to say, saying, not just trying to say, but trying to do it. That's tough. Okay, and if you make mistakes, people will tell you, and they'll publish things that immediately. Okay. So the in between that list of different topics, which in a sense says, they're so different we can't compare. In between, the in between is the idea that these things overlap, and the question is how can we make sense of overlap? Let's go back to one or two big theories in this area. One is Darwin's evolution theories. The social version of that has been called social Darwinism, widespread in the late 19th century, especially in the U.S., especially at places like Yale, Columbia, and then in a different version at the University of Chicago in sociology. This was part of the old Chicago school in the 1920s, especially Park and Burgess in their book The City. It was a okay. We can elaborate that later. That's one kind of theory of how the world, and in a sense, a good chunk of IR is close to that, I would say. The domination. I mean, how and why do people and do nations dominate? Proximity, money, military, those core concepts that John Mearsheimer uses as the leading, really main general theorist of international theory these days here in political science. One kind of theory. Second kind of big theory, Marx. I'll just leave it at that for the moment. Third kind of big theory, group theory, developed here in Chicago, especially for political scientists, focusing on interest groups, which can also be ethnic groups like the Irish, the Poles, the Jews, etc., and how they may work as actors in making policy. Within well, let me just simplify. The left-right classification is a widespread concept, especially from the French, roughly the time just before and after the French Revolution, where people would sit at a table, but with the idea that the left implied a more active government spending more, and the right implying sometimes this was more militarily nationalist, like de Gaulle later on. Other times the right could be defined as Margaret Thatcher really brought in markets. Before Margaret Thatcher, the Conservative Party stressed tradition, and in ways that were much more important, so that when Margaret Thatcher had, said, we don't just want to have tradition, we want to have markets which are closer to what Milton Friedman is talking about, Chicago style market analysis. And when Milton Friedman flew to talk to Margaret Thatcher in London, there was a big tabloid headline which said, "Milton, England hath no need of thee." These kinds of labels and trying to relabel these things in ways that would bring along, okay. So within politics, if you will, we have a left and a right, and that was really highly widespread from the mid-19th century in Europe, from the U.S. after the New Deal with 1933, basically, with Roosevelt. And so the left and the right had a pretty clear meaning for a certain period. Let me add even maybe an anthropological meaning here, marked most of all by a publication in 1955 of Claude Lévi-Strauss, arguably the leading anthropologist in much of the 20th century. He published Triste Tropiques, sort of sad tropics. And it was not that the tropics were sad, it's anthropologists are sad because they lost their field work, or their domain of their field work of going to the Trobriand Islanders or whatever. And they would then implicitly and usually explicitly assume that they were isolated from the world. And so when Lévi-Strauss went to Brazil and he wanted to find an isolated tribe that he could study, he kept asking around, where is there an isolated tribe? So he got deeper and deeper into the jungle, and he kept going inside. And he said, no, but they're making steps outside. They've got books. They've got things. They've got all kinds of contacts with the rest of the world, which is not as isolated. And he kept looking and looking, and finally concluded, we are global. There aren't no isolated tribes anymore. And Clifford Geertz gradually came to the same conclusion. Mary Douglas in England reached the same conclusion, and basically the anthropologists then began to be very triste because they lost their whole discipline as a distinctive niche of studying tribes that are isolated and understood the world, because that is, you had to assume they were the world somehow. Otherwise, who would care who would care about one little tribe in the middle of the Brazilian jungle, unless it had implications for France, England, the U.S., and so forth. And so that in turn led to a crisis among anthropologists. What do we study and do? And so some of them shifted to studying linguistics, brilliant linguistics. Others have shifted to studying cities or unusual things in cities, very poor people or the homeless or something like that. Or others have criticized the assumptions and the the rationales for political leadership, for being mayors, for all kinds of other things. And some of them try to combine these. It's like Michael Silverstein's very particularly talented guy here for several decades. But and Clifford Geertz. So let me say not more on that. We potentially can, but let me just take another discipline. Economics. The market was economics for Milton Friedman, but in earlier years it was not. There were Marxists in this department in the 1930s and 40s. And others had a very different perspective. Gary Becker came back here in the late 20th century, and he did his PhD on human capital, and he tried to measure racial discrimination by blacks would have to pay higher prices if they were in their neighborhoods or going to certain kinds of activities, and so he could try to measure in that way discrimination. So he regularly broke the rules in choosing a topic and in modeling and analyzing and trying to make sense of it. And he then in turn trained a whole generation of followers who have transformed the whole discipline of economics. I shouldn't say all, but definitely at this department. But this is for many purposes the leading economics department in the world, or has been ranked that way for most of this period, for decades, in terms of measured by Nobel Prizes and so forth, including author of a book called Freakonomics. Freakonomics. Okay, imagine that. Freak anthropology. Okay, and to call that, and also be a professor at the University of Chicago. Okay, so Becker could write about love, inheritance, religion, etc., etc. I'll just add. So, what I'm getting to with these examples is to say, life has gotten more complicated relatively recently, and many of the big theories are 19th century theories. Group theory, social Darwinism, Marxism had a certain power in the 19th century, but when we get to the 21st century, we've got to change. And sometimes big changes. But where and how is not so easy or clear. But we will try to do so in this course. And so in that sense, we're not doing more than just studying cities. We're trying to, in this sense, we can say this is a course on general culture, on general education within the social sciences, and it's fair enough to ask these bigger kinds of questions. At the same time, we want to try to say, well, how can we do this, which is asking it in a systematic a way and answering it in a way, or looking for answers that can be at least roughly comparable to the systematics that we expect in the social science division of this top university, which is where this division, the social science division, compared to natural science, humanities, and unlike the Ivy League, for example, social sciences have been number one, and that's the opposite, say, at Harvard, for instance, or has been the best, kind of in that respect. Okay. So the point I'm making here is we will draw on the best ideas we can find, and we'll draw from anthropology, economics, political science, sociology, geography, because these are all, in my view, highly interrelated, and we include some journalists. How to answer the question of how do we deal with the different definitions? And one answer is illustrated by someone who published a book called The Art of the Deal. Who's that author? Anybody know?
Sailor?
It's Trump.
Donald Trump. How does he do this in this? How can he potentially include be laughable in this? That is, it's not laughable. What he's doing is and that is, many of the smartest political theorists, for see it in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, John Locke, Hobbes, Rousseau in France, they focused on contracts and where and how the contracts in those, and you could then build a whole theory of democracy or private property or how the economy fits together and so forth. This is the in a sense, the idea is to narrow the focus on something which you want to you really want to stress, and in that way, do something in the political science field. It has been most explicitly by Ronald Inglehart, for instance, and Dahl, and Dahl's Who Governs. Dahl that is, the problem of Hunter in terms of Dahl's criticism was, if you talk about power, power is too vague and loose. That all power should be related, says Dahl, should be related to the particular issue area. That's the big concept I'm introducing here. Look at the issue area, which may be high tech, or it may be entertainment, or it may be Wall Street, that these issue areas have different kinds of logics. And it doesn't mean that you're necessarily in contradiction, but it simply says, look at where and how they're interconnected empirically. That is, how much does the economy affect politics? Instead of assuming or shouting that there is a military-industrial complex, how much is there an impact of the military on the other things, etc. So I'll maybe leave it for that, but we will use that conceptualization as we proceed. Well, what my link with the link with Trump is that Trump most visibly, and he was not the first, for sure. I'm pointing to Dahl, if you will, as maybe one of the best persons who has honed the concept of issue specificity like this. But Trump has done this in practice by saying, I don't want a lot of money to become president of the United States the way those other people have done. I've got a lot of my own money, but I'm not going to spend it. I'm going to really get elected. Maybe not talk quite this way, but I'm going to get elected by using Twitter. It's free. Okay, and then who owns Twitter, and then where and how, and then so you can write, and so people, but he's contradicting himself. Yes, he contradicts himself, in the same tweet. But his contradiction, what's the meaning of contradiction? This is where we get back to issue specificity, go back to say contract theories. So my point of this is to say we've got these messy concepts of, say, of populism or fascism, etc., and how these things can be brought together and honed appropriately. Let me put one very quickly on the board and say we can look, for example, if we stop board. If we've got a global averages of how many people, what's the average number of persons in the world who have a cell phone? It may be that the average is, maybe 22%. But if we get to national variations, may be more. This is one number for the whole world. But if you take the whole number for the whole world, I mean, the people who are for Americans, this is very different from people in a poor country in Africa. So if you look at the national average, instead of being 22%, it may go from nearly 0 to nearly 100 or something like that. But if we go, sorry, I shouldn't say that. Let's say 60 from 20 to 60. The point I'm making here, if we go down to the local, say cities or neighborhoods, something like this, we may have more extremes as well, like Hyde Park versus Brownsville. Brownsville is my neighborhood. I always lived in Brownsville. The strength of what that illustrates is that if we want to compare the bigger variations, having in our minds New Haven, Berkeley, Austin, can be very different from each other, including, let's say, Las Vegas or New Orleans. New Orleans before all the problems, etc., and then afterward. That is, these places are very, very different. And because they're smaller and they permit self-selection and people who are very different moving to or leaving other places in ways that, and the things that they're associated with are complicated. That is, that you can potentially separate out different variables by having more of them, more cases and more variations empirically. Related, I'm adding a couple of sort of big points that are connecting each other. Another rationale for getting to the 21st century and why to challenge some of the 19th century is particularly 1968 and 1989. These two big dates. 68 was the student revolt. 89 was the Berlin Wall. After these two, we have more politics and major kinds of big decisions that are empowering more people in a more popular, average person kind of way. That is, the technocrats, the professional, narrow, expert domination has weakened in ways that you could have in Cairo, for instance, the Velvet Revolution. The president of the country would simply, basically, after a week or two, with no real violence, say, "Okay, I'll give up being president." This has not happened, of course, in Syria, in the Ukraine, or other places. But we have big variations in ways that, in some instances, we've got much more. I'll put a big heading here: the rise of citizens. That average citizens have risen in salience around much of the world, and this is then heightened through Hollywood, through all kinds of things, and the corresponding value is egalitarianism. That some things should be done in a way that the average citizen, and some will say all citizens of the world, should have a right to a cell phone. Okay. The two then big concepts. I'll put put this on. Multidimensionality and multi-causality. Multidimensionality is illustrated as I've been talking about globalization. That is, they're different dimensions: politics, economics, entertainment, and so forth. Another one is if we then think of all this x1, x2, xn. What are the causes of let's say, political leadership? And these in turn can lead to policy outputs, and these in turn may feed back into a whole bunch of other things. And then we can put a box around this, and we can say this is our unit. And our unit can be a local government, or a neighborhood, it can be a nation. And then when we say we now want to compare Unit 1 to Unit 2, we want to say where and why A and B and C change. That is, the dynamics of theorizing and these processes are different. That is, it may be that some places money drives everything. Others will say, no, it's white men, and so forth. So in these respects, we can say this is a way of modeling, a system-to-systems framework. Globalization, we then might be able to put into this and say, rather than saying globalization is not, globalization doesn't have to be an X2, have to be a direct cause in all itself. That is, globalization may, as we can say, interact with or heighten or suppress the magnitude of A or an A or a B or a C. And so then how to study globalization, and not because I'm arbitrarily trying to make it look more complicated, but this is the way the way globalization works, and many other things are increasingly recognized as complicated. And so you can try to simplify, as the economists can often be explicit and say, ceteris paribus, assume everything else is equal, I'm going to study just two variables. And economists are, in the old I would say the old days, often would say that or comfortable doing that. But with Freakonomics, the author has even said, I don't want to be called an economist anymore. I want to be called a data analyst. Okay, that's even happening. But the point is, these things are complicated, and it makes sense to try to analyze where and how they do fit together, even if the normal dynamics fail. Okay. I'll just add one more point, then let's have a little bit of discussion for today. Although I try to build in more in general, but we got so much to say. Okay, I'll just add one more quick kind of thing, which again shocked us and which is interesting. The arts. We were collecting data about local areas and different kinds of activities, and we had census data on the along if we have we have X1, X2, X3. I mean, to try to explain economic development, migration, going bankrupt, all kinds of these normal things. We could then have we brought in percentage of arts jobs. So we had the normal model specified with income, education, occupation, and then as a dependent variable we could have the growth of the increase in the number of jobs was the dependent variable. What drives more job growth? And the data we had then was 45,000 zip codes of the entire U.S. So we had lots of little zip codes, and some were growing, some were declining, some were the same, and so forth. And then what drives economic growth? If you read the New York Times, the financial, the economics journals, etc., people talk about human capital, income, education, occupation, crime, climate. These are all the classic kinds of things. We included all those. What was the most important variable in explaining job growth over recent years? The percentage of arts jobs. We thought we made a mistake. And then we started to study it a little more closely, and basically we'll see this in the course. There's a lot going on there, and there's almost nothing that 98% of the social scientists ever talk about. And if you ask the artists or people who are professors of arts or art history or music, they don't care. I won't say they don't care, but they don't frame it in a way that would be a testable hypothesis, in ways that would be social science, if you will. Okay. So where and how the arts work and interact with these other things have led me to write new books, explore new kinds of relationships, and that in turn is something which you'll also see that is the interpenetration of entertainment into politics, into technology, all kinds of other things. But let me stop here. We have time for a couple of questions and discussion, briefly. Reactions. Silence. What I usually try to talk about, what I couldn't get here, is say what's your position on this? People ask me, for instance, which city would you really like to live in? My answer is all of those. Every city has something good about it and interesting, and I love Bronzeville, for instance. But I could love living in many other places as well, big cities, little towns, in the countryside, different countries of the world, and I've learned from hugely, even in places in Africa. I worked as 4 months in Africa. I learned a huge amount because I learned so much. I loved it, and the people were very kind and cordial and so forth. But I had vomiting and diarrhea every single day for 4 months. Other thoughts? I know, yes, ma'am.
Can I answer your question with another question?
Please do.
So what is it about Bronzeville that you like? Because, I'm new to Chicago, and I only know about Bronzeville as one of the stops on the red line. So what makes it so special?
Okay. Harlem and Bronzeville are the leading definitions of the leaders of African American culture in the U.S. And in terms of many things that are in Hollywood, many things that are people see as real entertainment or real style for clothes, for doing other things in places like Sweden or big designers like Louis Vuitton. They have African American models and themes. They hire them, Beyonce and others, to work with them on Inspirit. That is the large number of underemployed, especially young men, who refuse to take jobs as waiters. They are concerned about honor. and respect. Dissing someone is something to be killed for. Their norms and values, which are different and openly critical enough with American values in general, that it's an anthropological experience every day. I also the South is an important personal background, which I can bring in, but that's my quick answer. Yes, ma'am.
As we're doing our readings, would you like us to supplement it with like local news stories for discussions, or will it be
Sure.
largely self-contained with what you're providing for us?
Well, whatever you want is fine. In terms of, I would say I encourage us to discover, explore overlaps in ways we can learn from, and then say how much this concept or might this event from the past help illuminate or interpret what's going on now. If we talk about a war or Ukraine, Russia, well, let me say, the three countries where I've worked the most and know the most about are really the U.S., France, and China. I lived in Paris for a number of years. I was a student. I taught at the Sorbonne twice. And now China in the last 20 years, the Chinese have really seriously embraced. We had about 90 students here, visitors, faculty, people, and China's one of the biggest countries in the world, and in a sense, as I said, the 19th century theory is European. The past is Europe. The U.S. was the present in the 20th century. We get to the 21st century, probably it's going to be Asia that's really much more important in many ways than but we'll see. It's not clear. And so where and why these things are happening makes, in that sense, I'm fascinated by China in the same way that Tocqueville was interested in America. The future for France is across the Atlantic. And it changes so fast. So we'll have a visiting professor here, not be here today, but she'll be here, Lu Min Chen. And she's very good at speaking up and bringing in Chinese examples. Two more minutes. Two more questions. Comments or questions of any sort? That is one. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you talk a bit about the final paper?
Yeah. Have you glanced at what's in the syllabus?
Yeah, I was just
Sure.
wondering, like, if there were like past examples or like topics or just any specific.
Yes, I mean there are many topics that are mentioned here in the syllabus. Look on Canvas online, and I think there's several papers that are there that you can immediately download. I used to have boxes and boxes of them. Then we gave them to Regenstein, and I think they returned to me. But I think Regenstein somewhere has dozens, if not hundreds, of student papers from the past. So yes. But most of all, you can do whatever you want. We want you, I would say, whatever you want, we love to see you engage, but on the other hand, it needs to be broadly within the domain of the course, but as you see, I'm pretty broad gauged in saying what fits. If there's something which you can fit it to, and also be, say, a BA, an MA, another course paper, or have an interest three other people share, and you might do a paper together, that would be fine too. Kill two birds with one stone, and whatever. And similarly, you can do any kind of participation can improve your grade. That is, if you do more work and it shows and you've learned from it, and we can see you're really high, that's a damn good idea. Then Yes. Yes.
Are we gonna get the chance to talk about the upcoming presidential election at all, or not really in this class?
Which president?
The presidential election is coming up.
Oh, in the U.S.?
Yeah.
Sure. That is, yeah, that is, let's try to connect it to the themes of the course, but, I mean, but for sure. That is, one sentence on that is, politics, as well as the economy, as well as the content of anthropology, have become much more complicated. Most of all, say if you want to be president, or if you want to be mayor, or if you want to form a new civic group on campus. I mean, how to structure it has changed in ways, and so, but rather than saying it's all noise, or it's all random, or it's each person is a unique head, our ideas are to try to find ways that we can say we've got places, we've got theme processes and dynamics that really had a sense that when we had a strong Marxist domination, that this is the way that it worked, and in that way, in a Marxist society, this is the way that this happened, and where now it was done. With the New Deal breaking up in the U.S., it's more complicated. Okay, so yes is the quick answer. Thank you, folks. Office hours are normally Monday, but if there are people who want to talk about something, please feel free to we can talk right now.